Hello. Welcome to Building Renaissance Leaders Podcast. My name is Vic Vogel. This podcast, I'm going to try to explain up front, is a little different than what you might normally find when you do podcasts. We're going to try to make it a little more interactive. If anybody decides to join us tonight, I'm not sure that's going to be the case. I gave very little warning. But anyway, I'd like to go ahead with the podcast anyway. If somebody does, we'll get to those questions. We'll show you what we mean. Uh, what we're trying to do in this series of podcasts is to give you an idea of how interpersonal communication is important to small businesses and medium sized businesses in particular, but also to larger businesses. And in the wider scheme of things, it's really important to you from a personal standpoint. So, a lot of what you're going to learn or hear in this series of podcasts is going to help you in what I call a micro level, where that might be a family or your friends or a church environment or a nonprofit organization you're with, all the way up to the macro level, which might be uh, government leaders, in a government, or even the UN trying to pull together a bunch of governments. So that's the macro level. That's the ultimate big picture perspective. Interpersonal communication plays an integral and vital part in all of that. It it's the glue that holds us together as a humanity and a society. And that's whether we're in that micro area, like a husband, wife, and a family, or whether we're in a major organization. But in particular, what I find is small businesses and medium sized businesses don't get the opportunity that larger organizations do. They don't have the funds, they don't have the revenue to bring in consultants. Like when I was a consultant, it cost tens of thousands of dollars a week for me to spend several weeks and sometimes a couple of years or more in an organization. So you can see how that would uh, accumulate a lot of costs to an organization. So it's always been a passion and interest of mine, and particularly since I retired, to take a look at small businesses and how we might be able to provide that kind of development to them so they had the opportunity to compete on that level that the large organizations do. And social media is one way to do that. It helps us to it helps us to reach more people. Now, it has some disadvantages in that it inhibits communication, but with something like a podcast, it provides us an opportunity to do visual as well as nonverbal communication, as well as verbal communication, and that adds a lot to the meaning when you're trying to communicate something as complex as interpersonal communication. So you might be asking yourself, well, you know, I don't have a problem communicating. And most of the time you might not. I don't know if you do or not. But sometimes you don't know whether you do or not. I know as a consultant and also inside an organization when I was a leader. And I had ascended up through the ranks over 40 years up into the executive vice president level, my first 35 years of being in the business world and with some significant corporations, some multi-billion dollar international and domestic corporations. And you understand and you learn as you grow in those areas. And one of the things that became apparent to me is we don't assess enough in the organization, throughout the organization. We do it by department, we do it by individuals. You know, you do performance appraisals once a year. Occasionally you'll assess a department or something like that at budget time. uh, but in terms of the whole organization, in terms of how are we doing all over, we don't spend a lot of time doing that. And so what we tend to do is we outsource this, which is one of the problems we're having. And of course, I'm a person that you outsource to, so I'm kind of talking uh, at odds with myself here. But the reality is we tend to outsource this too much. And consequently, that's monetized a whole leadership development world out there. I think I saw one research company was saying we spend something like $160 billion annually, and that's growing just on leadership development. But then we have other research that shows that our employees are not engaged in their work. They're not satisfied with their leadership. They're not satisfied with organizations. And they don't feel valued by the organization. So consequently, it's created an environment of workforce that goes searching for one company to the other, trying to find somebody who cares enough about them that it's a good place to work. And some of them are prepared to sacrifice uh, revenue or earnings in order to have that what we call a healthy culture, a mentally safe culture to work in. So how does all that transpire? How do we create those environments where people want to shift jobs? Or how do we create a better question is how do we create the environment where people want to come to work for you because they feel like they're going to feel valued and that they have an opportunity to be part of the organization? Well, there's a lot of dynamics to all those and a lot of key issues, but one of the most prevalent is how well we communicate within the organization. If you stop and think, uh, we belong to organizations uh, everywhere we go. Uh, a family is an organization. Uh, if it's a husband and wife, family is an organization. If it goes into grandparents and aunts and uncles, and it gets into a larger organization. When you meet with your friends, you're in an organization or group. When you go to church, you're in an organization. All of these, and you can go all the way up to governments. Like I said, there's micro to macro. And all of these organizations have some sense of structure to them. I do not recall ever being in an organization that didn't have some sort of structure that was hierarchical and had a leadership function attached to it. Now, that might be a group of friends together, and you may have an informal leader in that group of friends, but you probably do. If you, I mean, I've met with informal groups of people periodically that I didn't know real well, but they invited me to spend some time with them. And I simply asked them, do you have this sense of structure? Is there someone who tends to take control of everything? And the answer is yes, they do. It's true in the family, even though we want to consider a husband and wife equal. Normally, you're going to find one of them has a sense of a leadership role. And if they can operate equally, that's fine. But then they are in control of their children if they have children, and that is a leadership role in some aspects. So you have organizations, you have people in organizations, and that's how we are as a society and humanity. We have structure to that, and we have leadership to that. And how we interact, how we connect, determines the impact of that leadership and the effectiveness of it in guiding that group of people who have basically assigned a leadership role to people to help them operate and function in that group in a way that makes them feel valued, important part of the group, and that there's some structure to that feel comfortable. That's which is how you get policies and rules and laws and regulations. Otherwise, you'd have chaos. So by definition, we are a society of groups of people, and most of those groups have some form of leadership, from informal to extremely formal. And the larger the group, the more complex that interaction is, that interpersonal relationship is. And the one thing for sure is when you have more than one person, everything begins and ends with communication. How we interpersonally communicate, excuse me, communicate with each other. Excuse me, allergies are tough down here in Oklahoma. Okay, so keep that in mind, because when I talk to you about why interpersonal communication is important, it's because you create it that way as a society. You don't live isolated, you are connected. And when you're connected, you in fact need to have a sense of how you are valued in that organization, or by other people in the organization, or by someone else if there's just the two of you. So communication is the glue that holds us together. I think of interpersonal communication in the organization the same as the nervous system in our body. Now, think about our body. Our body is a closed system. Okay. You have organs, hearts, lungs, kidneys, liver, brain, uh, eyes. All these organs are things that operate together in unison. They are well structured, well planned. They all have a clear purpose. They all they all interact, and they kind of have a sense of dependency, interdependency on each other. And if something goes bad with one of those organs, you become unhealthy. And the more that goes wrong internally in your body, the more unhealthy you become, and then it can end up being fatal. I think of interpersonal communication the same way. It's a closed system. If you want communication to operate correctly in a way that it's intended to, and a way that it allows you to have a sense of influence over others, or a sense of capability of interacting with others effectively, you have to realize what goes on when you communicate. The, it is not just talking, or it is not just listening. It's not just feedback. I know a lot of corporations, a lot of training companies, they focus on active listening and feedback. Um, and it's because it's something that people don't quite grasp all of. They don't quite know what that means, so they feel like they're getting some education in that. And that makes those two areas more important than, say, message design or delivery or communication barriers or reception, okay? Or any other of the component parts of a total conversation. So it is more than just uh, talking and listening. And that's why when I was a leader and a consultant, I conducted numerous, numerous assessments and organizations to test where they were in various areas. And one of those areas would be communication often. Uh, and in assessing, I, I'm a, I don't have a total number. I didn't check every person I assessed off, but I know that it's in the tens of thousands of employees that I had assessed with both paper and pencil and computer based instruments. And it's into thousands of leaders over my career of 40 years. And so I have a pretty good sense generally of what people say. Now, one of the processes that I developed that helped me be successful in making assessments work in organizations was how I did that. It was a three-pronged approach. The first thing I did was conduct an assessment. I picked an assessment that was right for what we were looking for and was right for that organization and had a distribution process and a collection process that was confidential and could be counted on to deliver what we were looking for. So reliable and valid, etc. Once I administered that assessment, I collected all the data back to me first. I didn't tell anyone in the organization what any of the assessments said. I reviewed the data. The next peer or pillar of this process was the validation process. So I would get a cross section of all the employees that I assessed, and I would select some of them, bring them in, and in sometimes focus group size, we would ask questions that related to the assessment and record their responses. No, by record, I mean write down their responses and assess what they said to us, both individually and as a group, against the data we received and find out whether the data was, in fact, correct. And I can't even ever remember having to redo an assessment. But I would have been prepared to do that had that validity not worked out. So the third pillar of that was then to take the data from both the instruments that were collected and what it showed, what we collected from the validation interviews, put that together in a summary format and drop it on executives and say, hey, I'll be back in about a week. Tell me what you think. And when I come back, inevitably, the word that stuck with me more than any that I can think of was, this is a wake up call. What the hell happened? What is this about? Which meant they were sort of surprised by the reaction of the assessment. Now, some of them, it was not good news. Some of it was just off some. But in nearly every case, it was interesting that the perception that leaders had of the organization was not what the organization was telling them. And that was what the surprise was. That was the wake up call. And so during those validation questions and interviews, I always followed up and I didn't design these questions, but they appealed to me, so I used them consistently all through my career. Uh, three basic questions, three open-ended questions. What's the one thing that you like most about your leader? What's the one thing you like least about your leader? And what's the one thing that you would like your leader to do better? Now, those are open ended questions, but they are guardrail by something that could narrow things down quite a bit. And it was the operable word here is one, the one thing. That forced them to think broader about what all this was, but then to narrow that down to just one thing. And it was amazing to me. You got to remember, I've done like tens of thousands and thousands of managers, tens of thousands of employees, that when I asked that question, uh, what was the one thing you would like your leader to do better? Far more than any other response. I'm guessing past the 60-70% range was communication. And I know that to be still true today because in nearly every social media thing that deals with leadership or business or consulting or coaching, communication is an intimate part of any meme they put out that talks about either a quote or a statement or some sort of meme showing 10 best steps or whatever it is. There's something is in communication about all of those, just about. And and so that's what these people were telling us in organizations: communication. I'd like my leader to communicate better. So what's that mean? So that's my next question. Being a researcher and a person who's interested in researching, you know, it's easy for me to say, well, tell me more. What do you? So give me some examples of what you're talking about when you say communication. Well, the behaviors that they provided, the examples were literally behaviors of interpersonal communication. So some of the behaviors, for example, I'll give you is they might say, "I never see him." So there's just a lack of frequency of communication, and that's a behavioral issue. That's an interpersonal behavioral issue. I don't see him, so we don't have communication. Um, Others might be from the standpoint of the employee. They might say something like, you know, I can't. This he he told me to do something, and I just I can't tell him I don't understand what you're saying because it doesn't make sense to me. And what's going on there is they're saying one thing, but their nonverbal cues are sending another signal, and it confuses the employee. It's chaotic. It's incongruent. They have trouble making sense out of it. But then they're telling me I can't tell them that because I'm afraid if I tell them that, they'll think I'm stupid. And, so I just try to do the best I can do. And of course, the leader comes down and says to me, I told these people exactly what to do. And it just not getting done. I don't understand. Well, there is a consistent traditional problem I ran into more times than I can tell you. And it came down to they neither the leadership nor the employees really understood how to communicate interpersonally effectively. They had they had no idea. And this is what I discovered. within all of those organizational assessments I've done. And many of the organizations that I did, I realized before I could talk to them about conflict, before I could talk to them about uh, a difficult discussion to have with employee with a performance appraisal or a lack of empathy or something like that, I had to help educate them about how to communicate in a way that they could be understood, that the information they provided was accepted, that the ability to dialogue through a conversation to the point of understood meaning was part of a skill set that they need to learn before they could learn other things like how to control a conflict if it happened, or how to improve customer service, or something along those lines. They had to understand what was going on while they were talking to that person to make it more effective so they were more influential, they were more effective at getting their points across. And that was pretty consistent from dealing with executives and leaders. Because, see, communication in organizations, I don't care whether it's micro or macro, it's top down, but it's also bottom up. And if either one of those is being blocked or ineffective, your communication is lacking, your understanding is lacking. And that's throughout all organizations. I don't care who you are, where you are in an organization. That's happening in your organization. And it and you have to and I really can't blame the individual. So it was kind of like it's not like I can go in and say, you're not a good leader, you're not a good employee because of this. Because the reality is, and you can go check this out. Just check it out in your own school systems, or go just ask people periodically. I do this periodically. I say, have you ever had a course in interpersonal communication? I mean, enough coursework to really understand what is paramount in communication, what is paramount in interpersonal communication, more than one course called interpersonal communication, which gave you a brief overview, but you have no understanding about it. Have you ever had any in-depth course that would help you understand that if I said the meaning of the messages in the mind of the receiver would make you understand that there is something about that that makes sense about connecting with other people? And the answer is, by most people, no, because we don't teach communication in K through 12. We don't teach it. There are college students. I've had PhDs coming out of college, maybe two PhDs in some cases I can remember. They never had a course on how to communicate. I spent a lot of time with the PhD in a lab environment, helping them to pull their team together. And the first thing I had to do before I could even talk about teamwork, excuse me, was help them understand how to communicate with each other. Then we could talk about collaboration. Okay. We could talk about what parts of the team you can contribute, what you like to do best versus what somebody else likes to do. But they couldn't even get past the communication. This PhD had no skill set, and consequently, the employees also had no skill sets in this area. Most people don't, because they have not been educated in K through 12. Most people graduate from college without having any courses in interpersonal communication, and the ones they get are not near enough to make them comparable or competent in interpersonal communication. So that's the dilemma we're facing out in society in general right now. I saw it transpire throughout this whole election season. It just hurts watching it happen. Uh, and it's when you can't connect interpersonally and come to consensus on meanings because you don't have the skill set to even sit down and talk, then what you have is chaos, and you have conflict, and you have divisiveness, and I can name you know just keep on naming all the things that can go wrong. That you don't have to take my word for this. I promise you, once you see some of this, if you take it into heart and you learn it and you go out and look at what's going on around you, you're going to see it. It's going to be easy for you to identify. Then the next question is, can you correct it? That's what this course is designed to do. That's what this course is all about. It's 40 years of helping people improve this, 8 years of my education in this, uh, with a master's and halfway through a PhD program. I had to leave, like it's, because of the stress of travel and work and trying to bring a new family on board. Something had to give, and it was a PhD program. Now, so it's all of that combined, and then trying to take that and consolidate it down into not everything, but the things that are most relevant for leaders. So, what kind of things do you need to know about interpersonally communicating people when you handle conflict? So, we'll go over these. And so, that's kind of what I want to do next is spend some time talking to you about interpersonal communication. Then I want to spend some time talking to you small business people and medium-sized business people about the importance of you taking it on yourself to get this done, and maybe using a program like mine to help you get where you need to be, and then you can teach it to everybody below you, but helping you need to be over. So we're going to talk about that through this process. If you jump on board here and you are in fact, um, and I should be able to see your comments here uh, if they pop up. So I would say to you here, let me make sure I'm on line with YouTube. Now that I've gone through 30 minutes of presentation, part of my problem, I think I might have mentioned this, is I have a disease that is part of what happens when you grow old. It's genetic disease, it's essential shaking. And my mother had it, and it's sometimes difficult to type or whatever. So I can there. So I know we're up and running on this thing. So if you're watching this, you can sign into the chat and let me know where you are and where you're from. And I want you to be able to respond to me and ask questions through that chat. So part of how I'm going to handle this is I'm going to present some information to you, but as we're going, I'm going to stop and I'm going to ask you, do you understand it? And I won't know if you're not on here with me. I guess you can tell me that later in the comments, which I will appreciate very much, but that's asynchronous. It's a little late for me to help you do anything, to give you some free advice, if you will. So that's what this is here to be able to do. So if you didn't attend this one and you're seeing it later, make sure you attend the next one so you can take advantage of talking with a guy that's got 40 years of history of this and did it over tens of thousands of people and helped several companies change and become more successful. You'll want to participate with me in this process because I'm trying to make it more interactive rather than just read your chat question and answer the question. It's also a situation where if you are out there, I can slip you a link and you can request to join me and you can just jump on air here with me and we can actually have a conversation about your problem. And everybody can hear and watch this conversation. They can even comment it on the chat section. We can respond to those comments together. It's a growth. It's a way of using this medium to try and become a little more interactive, because just doing a podcast and reading comments isn't helping people a whole lot. When you can get into a dialogue, and well, you'll see, from an interpersonal perspective, we get in a dialogue, even if it's with chats here, we're going to grow a little more towards a common meaning and what you really need to have resolved for your problem. So that's part of it. So uh, if you're out there, uh, let me know that you're out there right now. So, what I want to do right now is kind of pop up here and talk to you about interpersonal communication. I want to show you that this isn't just all reflexive. We tend to think of things in our minds and our body and our brain and our nervous system. Something I've discovered in the last year or two is we tend to think of it as either reflexive or purposeful. And so reflexive would be, when you're walking, you like in the military, we were marching. It's left, right. Give me your left, right. Well, you're marching left, right, left, right. Now, if your drill sergeant says, and that's what we call reflexive. When you put one foot after the other, left, right, you don't think about it. It's natural. Your brain has established that as a pattern, so to speak. That's the simplest way. There's a lot more to that, and neuroscience plays a big role in what I'm talking about here in interpersonal communication. So it's something you're going to that we talk about in the course. We apply some science to some of this, but you're left, right, left, right. Well, if your drills, you do this day in and day out for like 5 months in training. You're doing something, and all of a sudden your drill sergeant goes left, right, left, right, left. You kind of like stop right in the middle of. It's not reflexive any. It's not second nature anymore. It's like what? Now I have to think about how do I put left, right. I mean, what do I do with that right foot? Uh, so that's the same thing about uh, when you're thinking and when you're processing information in an interactive scenario. There are some things that are natural. You walk by somebody, you go, "Hey, how you doing today?" And you're not expecting them to turn around and say, "Oh God, I'm glad you asked. Sit down a minute. I got a lot to tell you." You're going, whoa, man, that was rhetorical. I didn't mean to, but it's natural. It's reflective. You say, "Hey, how you doing?" Somebody else says, "Hey," back, or sometimes they just ignore you and keep walking. But but it's reflexive. That's kind of second nature. You don't have to stop and think about it. So when we're talking, sometimes it's reflective. We're just talking, da 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 da, blah blah blah. I think it works. So, and when you're listening, you just, listening, and sometimes you go into this trance and things are going by you like crazy and you don't pick up anything. You hear it, but you're not attaching it to your brain. It's not saying anything to you. That's a reflective. It's listening seems to be reflective. We've been doing it since we were 2 years old, so of course we're good at it, right? Well, remember, a lot of those people I talked about earlier in the assessments thought they were right. Yeah, I was. I'm a great. I'm doing fine at connecting with my people and leading. And they get the information back, and it's like a wake up call. Well, that's because when we teach something like active listening, now we're saying active listening is an intense listening. You have to get in a certain place and make it happen. You have to pay attention. You have to mirror the words back to, all the facets of active listening that you need to understand in order to actively listen to someone. It's important. Those are important things at the time. They're purposeful, and there's a place for them. It's just when they teach active listening, people walk out thinking, I have to be actively listening to everybody who talks to me. You're going to go crazy. You can't do that. You can't do that. So, part of this is understanding the complexity of what interpersonal communication is all about. So that's what I want to kind of do in this visit. What is the importance of interpersonal communication in our life? First of all, interpersonal communication refers to the exchange of information, ideas, and emotion between individuals within an organization. Now, remember, I told you, I don't know too many people who live by themselves in a cabin and don't attach themselves to anybody else in any way. So most of us, that's not most of us. Most of us live in organizations. And yes, you isolate yourself sometime, I need me time kind of thing, but you are part of an organization for the most part. So you're sharing your information, your ideas, and your emotions between individuals in that organization. The more, the more complex. The fewer, the less complex. But it doesn't make it any more difficult with just two people. Anybody who's been in an argument knows. It involves verbal and nonverbal communication. It involves active listening, the purposeful listening versus the reflective listening. It involves some sense of emotional intelligence, wanting or caring or concerning about being purposefully involved and wanting to know more about what's happening with that other person. And it involves understanding. Do you grasp what I am saying? Do you really? Are you paying attention now? So, it's also interpersonal communication is essential in leadership because it helps build trust and credibility among team members. It helps build trust. I don't care if you're a leader or not. It helps build trust generally. You are not going to have trust unless you interpersonally communicate with someone else or groups of else's, more people. That's wrong. I'm saying that wrong. No communication, no trust. It's just that simple. Now, you can communicate and not build trust. Okay. But trust, to get trust, it's essential you communicate. It's essential you communicate. And the whole idea about trust and how to build trust, that's a later segment on the podcast later down the road. So here's what we cover in these I told you there was these areas that I kind of collect that out of my 8 years of education and 40 years of work. These are the areas from a leadership perspective where somebody is trying to impact and lead groups of people in an organization. These are the areas we cover: conflict resolution, nonverbal communication, and verbal communication, and when those two don't connect, building trust, communication strategies for motivating and inspiring teams, developing active listening skills for effective leadership communication. So we talk about active listening. Are these striking home? Are any of these making sense to you? Is this stuff that happens to you? Communicating with diverse teams. And diverse teams does not mean nationalities or race. It can be the difference between men and women. It can be the difference between people who are educated and not educated. There's a lot of ways you can look at diversity. Everybody keeps wanting to throw out diversity, inclusiveness, and equity. They want to get rid of it. The fact is, you're dealing with that on an ongoing basis. If you don't have a means of dealing with that effectively, and maximizing and optimizing that diversity in your organization, whatever the diversity is, you have a problem. You're not going to be as effective as you can possibly be in an organization, period. So I don't know why you want to throw out diversity training, but maybe maybe the training you're getting is too isolated on race or something. But diversity needs to be taught in terms of diversity, not one or two specific diversities. The benefit of diversity, the issues with diversity, feedback and constructive criticism. Wow. I think about getting fired over Twitter. Wouldn't that be a hoot? Wouldn't that be a hoot? Happened, didn't it? Emotional intelligence and leadership. Emotional intelligence is about empathy. The dilemma with that is you may not understand empathy. Even if you were taught it, you're shown it, you're demonstrated it, you may not understand how to feel it. So, consequently, how you communicate it might be a problem. We talk about those kinds of issues during this emotional intelligence, program. So, in my this communication program is one of my recommendations for three pillars inside of a paradigm shift in leadership I call Renaissance Leadership Odyssey. And one of those is psychological, getting to know the leader and how to know the leader. And there's a whole segment about that. Another one is emotional intelligence, understanding that well and how to focus on that. And I even have a book out called uh, Managing or Navigating Conversations, the intersection between interpersonal communication and emotional intelligence. So these two, communication and emotional intelligence, are so entwined with each other they can't be separated. If you tear one apart from the other, both of them fail and fail miserably. So this is an important area to discuss, and we discuss a lot more than just the basic what is emotional intelligence. Building rapport and relationships through effective communication. Communicating with difficult personalities in leadership. Here you go. This is interesting. I worded it this way because, yes, it is for leaders to learn how to deal with difficult personalities, how to cope with those. But it's also, this course should go down all the way down to your employees, because employees have the same problem. How to deal with difficult leaders. And they have all the other problems too that I've mentioned so far. But this one really points it out. This isn't just for leaders. This could be used for employees to better equip to handle leaders. Because guess what? You may have an employee that works 10 years in the same department because they don't want to be a leader. They don't want to go anywhere else. You're satisfying them financially. You're giving them the perks they need. They're going to go through five leaders on an average. And they have to learn to interact with each of those leaders just as much as the leader has to interact with them. So there's a good, as another good, there's another thing we cover differently than what most people tend to look at it from a communication perspective. Applying your interpersonal communication leadership skills is something we talk about each and every core class we have. In this class, what happens is you'll get an assignment before the class where you're going to observe or participate in, or somehow you're going to get involved in whatever we're teaching that week. And you come back and you're going to be talking with 5 other team members and myself. We're going to be discussing what you experienced, and we're going to take what I train you in with the information I give you, apply that into what you actually had happen, and dialogue about that for about an hour and a half to discuss it through to get it into reality and absorbed into our minds from the standpoint of how it worked, how it didn't work, why it didn't work, how we can make it work better, etc. So you have that experience. And then after you've had this class, you're going to also, during that same week, be practicing and trying to implement what you learned in your own organization. And then you're going to come back and talk about what worked or didn't work along with your experiences in your exercise assignment. You're going to talk about what worked and didn't work about what you learned a week before and how we need to change ourselves to make that stuff work effectively. Because one of the biggest problems of leadership development programs out there, and this is from Gallup, and well, this might not be from Gallup, it's from a major research company, and basically what it said is, uh, when you send 10 people to class, there, 3 of them learned something. The other 7 didn't. 3 of them had some impact on the organization. 7 of them didn't. 2 of them had impact on their employees. 8 of them didn't. Okay. So this idea of transferring what you learn into the organization is a big part of an ongoing discussion through 12 weeks. And then the last week is really creating your strategy to implement interpersonal communication, education, and training into your organization through you and to your people, for example, so that they can grasp what you grasp and become more effective at your communication. So that's the gist of the course. So what we need to do now is talk about what happens when we communicate. So now let's talk about interpersonal communication. That process, that closed system, if you will, of communicating. What happens during 2 people communicate? What's going on in that closed system? And what we have here is basically a basic presentation. So bear with me as we go through this. I'll try to make it informative and not so boring. And if you have questions, you can type them up here in the section, okay? In the chat comments. So I want to talk to you a little bit about culture. Let me take myself off the screen here for a second. Because part of the uh, understanding about how to communicate is understanding uh, the people you're trying to communicate with, knowing enough about them in order to communicate with them. So you'll see more as we go through this how this plays out. But here's how culture works. Okay, there we go. You begin with you. You have a set of core values. These are values. There may be 5 or 6 of them. There may be more. I don't know. But most people just have a few. And these are deep seated, ingrained values that you normally get from those people who you care about that influence you the most. And, there are things like love and hate and racism and religion and belief systems and things like that. And these are exceptionally hard to change in anybody. They can be, but it normally takes a radical life event to get them changed. Now, to help you understand a little more, these core values begin to develop what is known as your belief system. This is your belief system might be a positive belief, and maybe your core values are extremely positive, and you're generous and compassionate and caring. Your belief system's all about that. Or if it's negative, you might be a narcissist, or greed or racism might be basically the primary belief system that you tend to operate from. But you have a belief system that is based primarily on your core values. It doesn't mean you don't have other values around you that have less influence over you than your core values, but these are the driving values. And from those, what happens is you create a set of expectations of yourself, of those you care about, and those other people out there who you don't know that are around you. And so your expectations are driven by these belief systems, which are governed by your core values. And since you have these expectations, now you're going out into the world. And when you get out there, this basically determines what we call your attitudes, or your attitudes are a good way to maybe refer to them as your personality. These are the outward manifestations of your expectations you've developed over using your belief systems. And they're related to how you appear to other people. So just these things are driving some sense of how people think about you if you never opened your mouth, but you did things around them, you know. But also how you say, what you say, and how you act and how you behave, and whether those are congruent are your attitudes. And these in turn tend to be reflected or demonstrated through your actions, your behaviors. So these are observable, concrete behaviors. You can watch somebody do these things. You can hear them do these things. You can see them do these things. At the root are the core values, which affect your beliefs, expectations, and create your attitude. So that's sort of how people evolve. This is what we mean by culture now. This is for an individual. Okay. Now you could put these into groups of people, and you can see the difficulty when if someone has a certain set of expectations and someone else also has a different set of expectations based on two different types of belief systems, you have conflict. You have culture variance, and this is one reason toxic cultures form, just one. It's at the core of the essence of people, though, what they tend to be looking for when they go looking in another organization for a job. Okay, now let me kind of relate to how this fits in organizations. Uh, if you're someone who's in an organization, you're probably at a certain level based on your needs. Now, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, by the way, a theory that was never proven statistically or anything, but has stood the test of time forever, and is probably the most common sense kind of theory you'll ever run into. There are those people who are living at what they call the psycho or the physiological needs. I need food. I need, I'm working paycheck to paycheck. I can barely feed my kids. I can't buy the medicines I need. I'm not sleeping well at night because of that. I have to go to Goodwill or go to church funds to get clothes for my kids to go to school. Those kinds of people, very survival oriented based people. Then you have the safety and security needs. If those are met, and your safety and security is are those things going to be met consistently enough that I don't have to worry about them, kind of thing. So that's one way to say it. And then if both of those are met fairly well, then basically you're looking for relationships, social environments, friends, that kind of thing. And then up the ladder to the point where are now have a high self-esteem. You have a sense of recognition, status. You have a lot of personal strength and a sense of freedom, and those kinds, and on up to self-actualization. So what happens here is people who are operating at this psychological level. Let me see if I can put it here. So the thing is, the farther you get from the center of the circle, the more your values are influenced by other factors. So you may have a lot of core values, and you may have a lot of clear expectations, and you may be firm in those. But when you go to work for a company, you might have, for example, the core value. It's almost a religious belief that I will not shave my beard. It is, in fact, a religious belief that my beard is something that I cannot tolerate going beyond. I, you know, I can be at that physiological need where my food, my shelter, my clothing, and health and everything are at risk. But if you tell me I got to shave my beard, I'm not going to do it. So you would have to fire me. So those people who are living at the levels around the physiological and survival needs and safety needs, they often might not. Uh, they might. There's two things they do. They may sacrifice if that core value is strong enough that where they won't, they just can't. It's just something they can't stand. Or they might give up that core value if they felt like it would satisfy their physiological and safety needs on a consistent basis. So, this is how your values and your expectations change as you bump into external forces out there in the world that have control over uh, your safety and your security, your physical health, your safety and security. You bump into those, then all of a sudden you may say, okay, to have a good job and have the money coming in and know it's going to be there, I can shave my beard. Okay. And so your core value begins to wither. So we're bumping into these all the time in cultural change. What when we talk about changing the culture from toxic to healthy, what are we really talking about, and who are we really talking about? Are we talking about one person in one department? Or are we talking about a whole department? And how, if you have diversity in those people in terms of the value system they have, not the race, not the age, not the sex, none of the other legal mumbo jumbo, just the difference between what you and I feel are important. That is where you really struggle trying to change a toxic culture into a healthy culture. So this is just to give you some insight. Now imagine that you could not talk to each other in a way you understood each other. Then could you possibly even remotely change this culture to where it was acceptable and usable in a manner for the vast majority of people anyway? See, so to even get to a point where you can talk about these things, you have to be able to communicate with those people of whom you are part of a group. And you are part of a group unless you seem to be some sort of hermit somewhere. So those people that are living in the self-esteem and self-actualization world, they're a little more resistant to changing those core values because they may have the $2,000 or $3,000 in the bank account that will hold them over until they find another position, or they may be comfortable enough with who they are and expert enough in who they are that they're going, hey, I can go to any of 10 companies out there tomorrow. It's not a big deal. Any of them would hire me tomorrow because I'm that good. That's your self esteem, self actualization level. So you have people in organizations that are operating down this physiological and safety needs, and you have people that are operating in self actualization level. And if the people operating in self actualization level are driving the culture, they may be pushing something onto the rest of the organization it doesn't want to handle, but it can't deal with because its fears for its safety and security. Again, problems we deal with when we change cultures all the time. For all you people who think changing culture, and if you don't have this kind of massive experience that a lot of us have had, you don't understand these dynamics and they get in the way. But before we could talk about any of this in any organization I was in, we had to solve the communication problem because we couldn't even get to the point of understanding what we meant by this until there was communication, until somebody could help connect us with it. So let's talk about interpersonal communication. This is a true case study. This is Carmen. Not really Carmen. I changed the names in the company, obviously, for privacy. But this is a real life incident. It's one I worked on. Carmen is director of operations for a manufacturing firm. That's the one thing that I didn't change. It was a manufacturing firm. Uh, and she has a dilemma on her hands in that a vice president of international marketing created a marketing plan and sold it to the senior executives of the team without talking to her about it. And they didn't either. And when she got whiff of it, she realized, I don't think I can do this. My people can't meet these objectives. We're going to fail. He needs to change his plan. I need to call him and tell him he needs to change his plan. Now, what I want you to do, having heard this information I gave you about culture here that I just spent some time on sharing with you, and if you need to stop this video and go back and review that, go back and review it before you go forward with this piece. Because I'm going to ask you, I mean, we're going to talk about how some of that we just talked about impacts how you interpersonally communicate with somebody. That's just part of it. But uh, so uh, let's find out a little bit about Carmen here.
Hi, I am a 40-year-old Caucasian female who grew up in an upper Midwest small town. I graduated from high school, and my first job was on an assembly line for a large manufacturing plant in the United States. I have been with the same company for over 18 years. From the assembly position, I worked my way up to lead assembly worker. Then I was promoted to supervisor, manager, and then to director of operations for the company. I served as our union rep for 10 years. I am married with 3 grown children, and I am equal income provider for my family along with my husband. I need to call Ali, our international marketing manager, and discuss a problem with his marketing plan he submitted for our operations vice president. Ali is a Middle Eastern man, with very traditional values and doesn't care much for women's opinions. He lives in Saudi Arabia, but received his MBA from Harvard. I need to call him today and discuss his marketing plan.
Okay, so what you have here is you heard a lot about Carmen. You heard a lot about her history. Someone who grew up in the United States of America, worked her way up through the institution. So I need you to kind of get a sense of what you think her core values are, etc. Then you have Ali, International Marketing VP, Harvard graduate, somebody who is living in Saudi Arabia, obviously has some sense of wealth about them to be attached to a U.S. company over there with this. Anyway, you can get a sense from what you know about Saudi Arabia and the culture and the issues around there. I see that there's a large difference between these two people. And that difference is in a cultural realm in some aspects of it. So already, Carmen is trying to create a message that she wants to send to Ali, and she's already at odds from a strong cultural variance with this person. So what she's, and by the way, he is a vice president of international marketing. Okay, and has already sold this to the executive team. She's just a director of operations. I say just. She's just, and you might think he's thinking she's just a director of operations in this company. And she is a she. That's another issue that is a cultural area here. So there is an example of what we don't think about a lot of times when we start trying to solve significant problems. Not reflexive things, not things we need to do this, we need, and it's just kind of almost second nature, but something we need to focus on, to concentrate, to solve and learn and grow and understand and solve. uh, this is a message she has to send him. So what she is doing is she is creating this message with her values. Now we get into some of the other things outside of culture that might be impacting this communication, maybe getting in the way of this communication between her and Ollie. And you might already be thinking them, but let me just say I picked this particular picture of her for a specific reason. And so for all of you who are too young, the thing on the table is a telephone. We used to use those instead of computers and smartphones. The other item on the desk there that isn't papers is a typewriter. It is not a computer. So this is kind of, I wanted to kind of make a point. She is trying to send or discuss something with almost a total verbal communication message going out to Ollie, who's obviously got a smartphone over there. He could probably FaceTime her if she had the stuff to FaceTime with, but she doesn't. Okay, and that's why I created this, to create that mess so that you could see there are a lot of things that can get in the way of communicating here and interpersonally connecting with another person. So, what's happening here? She's sending Ollie this verbal message, you know, and you can almost hear it. Hey, Ollie, this is Carmen, Director of Operations. Listen, the marketing plan you sent to the international marketing plan you sent and are presented to the executive team a month ago. Uh, you didn't talk to me about that, nor have they. And I don't think we can do this. I don't think we can manage to get this done. We don't have the manpower. We don't have the trained skills to do it. You're asking for a massive increase. Nobody talked to us about it. I think what I'd like you to do is consider changing your marketing plan. That's the kind of conversation would be a reflexive conversation. If you just saw it and you said, I got to call this guy, picked him up and started having a conversation with him before you thought about it. Okay. So when you're sending this message, normally, if you were together across the table, you would have a nonverbal signal that you could kind of see how he was reacting to you and your message while you were talking to him. And you may be able to alter that if you thought it was going to be troublesome for you. But in this case, we don't have that. We don't have any nonverbal information whatsoever. And she has kind of created this message coming from where who she is, a woman that's worked her way up in the ranks and is extremely proficient in the operations realm. So she feels very comfortable in her argument. So Ali's taking this phone call. He's in Saudi Arabia, you know, and he's got all of the cultural issues and baggage that Saudi Arabia men tend to have in that country. Uh, and plus, she's a high school graduate. He's a Harvard graduate. Okay, there may be some of this. Are you are you kidding me? You can't handle this kind of stuff on his part. So he's hearing this message and he's really processing the message using his cultural background. So once he hears the message, you could literally hear him kind of saying a verbal message back to her saying, "Look, Carmen, I understand you have a problem." And most director of operations would probably know how to figure that out. What I think what you need to do is just figure this out. I've already sold this. The company needs this. The executives like this. This is a well thought out plan. You need to figure out how your operations people are going to make it work. Bang, hang up the phone. Now, here's interesting. Before he gave this information back to her, had we stopped the conversation, if he would have just hung up on her, she would have no idea how he feels. She would have nothing. So what we have here is he's communicating the same way, no nonverbal communication either, but we have feedback now. And what if she's not trained effectively to pick up on the nuances that he's sending her, like anybody else would be able, any other directing marketing would be able to handle this. That could be a nuance that's slighting her as a woman. Okay, and it wouldn't necessarily come across directly. A lot of times the language is a nuanced language. It's not set out. It's not said directly. It's inferred. It's inferred, and it could be inferred from the tone of voice or the pitch that he says it from. But if she's not trained to hear, see, and pick up on that during her active listening, the feedback may not be useful to her. She may pick it up as just total resistance. Okay. And then, so what she has at this point in the communication process is a scenario that says, um, do you try to continue this on, or do you just cut it off and take your argument to the senior executives? Okay. And if you try to continue it on, but you're not skilled and trained and you haven't picked up on the issues that Ollie's sending you, and you don't know how to overcome those cultural variances, for example, or the educational variance, you might start arguing with him and come up into a conflict that could create a real disaster for both you and Ollie when you both have to sit in front of the executive team making your points. So this is what we call the closed system. A message is created, it is sent, it is received, it is feedback occurs as to whether or not the message is effective or not. Now, if you cut off all the feedback, you basically have cut out the heart of the system of the body here, and the body dies. In other words, the communication dies. There's no meaning to it whatsoever. So what we have to do here is take a look at this and say, what's wrong with this? Why did you even go down that route? Now, the good news is before Carmen got into this conversation, she called me up and I was coming out to her manufacturing facility the next week. So she put it off for a week, which was good because it gave her some time to think. Uh, and we handled it a little differently, and we'll cover that in a minute. Here's a point I want to make about communication. It is a big area. It is a big area, folks. These are all the things that people specialize in communication: mass communication, television market, political communication. You got your earful and your mind full of that for the last 6 months. Uh, Cultural communication, which we're talking about here, small group communication, technical communication. These are all specialist areas that people go to school and specialize. Underpinning all of those is the idea that you have to connect with someone to have all of this communication transpire. And that is the interpersonal communication. So if you have more than one person engaged, everything begins and ends with interpersonal communication. Should say interpersonal communication there. Now, if there's anybody watching this, and there appears to be none that I can see, at least I don't see any chats, then we would stop and ask some questions here. See, and I could answer your questions, and you could ask me some more questions, or you could ask a second question. I could follow up with you. You could ask to come online with me, and we could have a discussion about your question, and it might edify a whole bunch of people if you'd only join me on this podcast. So, since this one seems to have gone through, let's move on to the next segment. It's everybody has responsible. Okay, every message has a purpose. Most purposes are influenced by belief systems leading to perceived expectations of others, which formulates an attitude towards them and are represented by your behavior towards them. So you have to understand that that's how it's being perceived. You have some expectations, so you design your message in a certain way that satisfies you, uh, and then you have an expectation of what you think that other person should respond to you based on your message you sent. The sender is responsible for creating a message with the receiver in mind. Hence, the meaning of the message is in the mind of the receiver. In other words, when you create this message with all of these expectations and everything, what you have to do is also know enough about the person that you're going to send the message to create it in a way that addresses his cultural expectations and norms and belief systems. So you've got to kind of get your point across, but make sure he's open to hearing what you have to say. So you need to know enough about that, and you need to think enough about that on these purposeful, these, areas of communication you need to spend more time on. These purposes, you need to think about that. You need to think, well, how's Ollie going to react? What's he normally believe? He probably doesn't think too highly of women. And, women, he's got a he's got a master's degree from Harvard, and I just graduated from high school. I don't know what would even make him. He doesn't know me well. What would even make him think I know anything about business, let alone running this operations? Okay, so these are things you need to keep in mind about your responsibilities when you're communicating. The receiver is responsible for practicing those same skills. If Ollie receives a phone call from her, he ought to realize he doesn't know much about her. He might want to start probing with some questions about her before he responds to her request. The more he knows about her, the more he's better able to decide what would be an appropriate response. So these are things that you need to keep in mind that are focused on responsibilities, culture, those kinds of things in the process. So I thought I'd cover some of those barriers that might come in. Now, so that's a cultural. That's just a cultural side of things. Here are some things that can get in your way that can impede or change the meaning of or create a problem in communicating. There's some internal barriers. These are kind of more of the barriers that you can control. You can improve, or somehow you can talk through them and control them. Cultures, there could be geographic cultures like language, laws, values, belief systems, history, tradition. All those cultural things can get away. We were seeing this with Ali and Carmen. uh, Educational, the degrees that you have, bachelor science, PhD, what, how many credential and acronyms do you have behind your name? Institutions you attended, Stanford versus Paducah University in Kentucky. Experience, 10 years of operational experience or 2 years of vice president, international vice president experience. Grades 2.0 versus 5.0. Certifications. These are the acronyms that I look at LinkedIn and I saw, I think, one profile on it had something like 7 acronyms. It had the master's or whatever it was, and then it was every certification they ever had after that. It was like a large, of which I knew none of them. And so they didn't mean too much to me, but other than this person has obviously spent a lot of time learning stuff. Okay, now whether they've applied any of it, I have no idea. I couldn't tell from their work history how much they'd applied anyway. And if I did, a lot of times it's not very much or not very long either. Uh, then you have things like personal biases, race, gender, age, sexual, like male female situation, disabilities, religion. There's a lot of biases in there that can get in the way of people talking to each other and understanding each other. Personal or psychological, you could have personal stability issues. Relationships could be going sour. Life events might have hit you, or psychosis, or you may be an undiagnosed ADHD person, and you have certain things that your brain's chemicals process that impact you. And some of those things, for example, are neon lights in ceilings, or too much noise around, too much information to process noise wise. That actually cause physical pain to people who have ADHD or are autistic. Uh, and you may not be so far on the scale that it's recognizable through your speech or social behavior. This could be you're close to it or just over it or something, and these events, but they may cause you uh, uh, a situation where you have trouble communicating with someone impactfully. Then there's some external barriers too that can get in the way. Some of these we don't have control, some we do. You could have geological things. You could have mountains get in the way of your cell phone. You could have all kinds of things, weather variances, natural disasters. I know. Uh, I think we had 10 tornadoes in Oklahoma a few weeks ago. At one time we were all dodging, and sometimes cell phones are too hard. The signal gets jammed when you have that many people trying to call around asking if everybody's okay. So you have trains. So some of those things, cell towers, you're out of signal. uh, you have structural issues, organizational. They can be structure issues, how the organization structured policies, geo positioning between countries, U.S., different country, laws, rules, size, roles that people play, accountability, budgets, politics can be involved, training and development, how that's impacting you, visions versus mission or visions, how that vision is formulated. Missions, one of the missions I used to always challenge people would say, people are our most valued assets, but they were the first thing to let go if they got into financial trouble. I said, just take that out. That's a lie. Then you have technical issues like hardware, software, resources, people like myself that's not well trained in all this stuff. The expectation that everything has to be perfect in a podcast, that it's not reality. Uh, it's showmanship more than it is content, things like that. Cost, research, innovation, all those things. And then you have societal things like cultures, societal perceptions, tribalism, cults, community involvement, power, brokering, economics, all kinds of things. So there's a lot. There's a lot that you need to understand. So if we were offering Carmen some advice, I wonder how that would turn out. So we had a talk. And I said, Carmen, what if you approach this with Ali in mind? And what if we cleaned off your desk and updated it a little bit with some technology? And let's see how this might work out better. So Carmen decides to give Ali a call, and we talked about some of these barriers and what she thought she might do and be able to do. And what it ended up is she sent Ollie a message that said, Ollie, I need your help in trying to implement your marketing strategy so we can meet your goals. Uh-oh, she didn't tell him she had to change his plan. She asked for help. Oh, wow. Ollie kind of, that puts him in that position of superiority, even though she doesn't consider it that way. She played it, and she was asking Ollie for help. And not because she wants to satisfy her people's need to not work harder, but she presented him with, hey, you didn't, you didn't, I want to meet your goals. So he's all of a sudden going, well, I never talked to her about those goals. Hmm. So she's presenting me with some things saying she needs my help meeting my goals that I didn't talk to her about. So already we have a change in attitude in Ollie. Now, what she also did to make sure he couldn't dodge much of anything, she had him face to face. So he had to look at her while he was going to respond to this question. So he heard this message a little differently than say he might have heard the first message. And now guess what happens? So he creates his own message, and he's thinking about her now when he's creating this message. And his message back to her is, what are the issues? And let me see if I can help. And he's sending, and so the feedback comes back verbal and nonverbal, so she can tell from his how he's looking at her and his body position and his intonation in his voice and what he's saying and the whole general expectation and attitude thing has changed a little. And so he's now more in a helping mode. So now what we have here is we have a way of looping this conversation to continue it. So it's just not, so he just doesn't hang up on her or offer some excuse, I got to go. We'll talk about this later. He's sitting there saying, what are the issues? He's asking for some more input. Let's see if I can help you. Okay. And she now has the opportunity to explain the issues and what could go wrong and from, basically generated because he didn't talk to her about the plan before he presented it. So they could keep going in this loop, and the closer they get, the more comfortable they're going to be with each other, and the more they can continue to see each other and respond. Uh, you might come out with a solution. Look, I'm going to be in town next week. Let's sit down and really nail this down, okay? And then if I have to change something, I'll go back and tell the guys because we don't want to create a plan that we can't hit. So all of that came out of that program. She heard it. There was some active listening on her part because she was asking for help. She was literally listening. I was sitting next to her. She was literally listening more to what he had to say, and she took the time to clarify some things he said. So here's some key takeaways from this process. The meaning of the message always uh, resides in the mind of the receiver. And I want you to keep that in mind because uh, it is your way of connecting most effectively with the other person. You have to understand a little bit about in purposeful conversation, not those reflections, not the hi, how you doing kind of conversation, but conversations like these, things that are important to you, the organization, and impact other people, by the way. Also, hang on. There we go. Feedback is a breakfast of champions when it comes to communication. Okay. So anything but by couching and knowing your other person and creating that environment that opens up the dialogue, you have more and more feedback. The more feedback you have, the more information you have, the better your chances of coming to a common meaning with common expectations and goals. And that's where you want to go to in just about any conversation, as opposed to arguing and fighting and debating. The most important tool in your communication toolbox is active listening. There's a lot more to active listening that most people are being taught in courses today, and I'm not going to get into those right now, but there is more, and you want to know when and where and how to use active listening appropriately. And now, if your whole life is about active listening, if you're a hostage negotiator like Gary Nessner and some of these other people that I've seen on LinkedIn lately, they're doing some pretty good videos you should go watch, by the way, if you want to learn a little more about communication. Uh, those positions are about active listening just about every statement they make because lives are at risk. Lives are at risk. Plan your important or difficult messages before initiating your communication. Don't just pick up the phone and go make a call. Think about the other person. Think about how you think they're going to react. Think about what you want to say to them. Have your information ready to go. Uh, and when they give you feedback from your presentation, listen to what they have to say carefully because if you're listening, it gives you a chance to think through how I might want to reposition a statement that clarifies that or the next question to help him clarify that or her clarify that. Communication is the vehicle for building trust. You will not, if you can't communicate interpersonally effectively, you will not build trust in organizations. You can't. It just won't play out well. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff that I shared with you. Actually, that's the introduction program. Um, but if you were here now, what I'd be asking you is, what is it that you feel? What do you experience out there now when it comes to trying to communicate with your boss or your leader? As an employee, how difficult is it to you to go in and ask questions? When's the last time you saw anybody go into your boss or you've gone into your boss and sat down and said, "Hey, boss, just off the cuff, how am I doing? Give me some feedback." Or if you're a boss, have you done that with your boss? When's the last time you or your spouse sat down at a table with the family and said, "Hey, guys, how am I doing as a husband? Or how am I doing as a brother? How am I doing as a friend?" Try that. Try that next time you're in your gals' night out meeting. Just when everybody's kind of had a couple drinks and everything, say, "Hey guys, I just have a question. How am I doing? How am I doing as a friend?" It's going to stop them in their tracks. They've never probably heard that question presented. But yet it's one that is probably going to be pretty meaningful to the person asking it. They would struggle. And don't let them get away with, "Oh, fine. I'm doing fine. You're doing fine. Well, what's that mean? Tell me more. That's a good one. Just tell me some more about that. That you will find that you will either find a superficial friendship going on here, or you will find out that there is more meaningful friendship than you even knew about in the first place. So interpersonal communication is a hard thing. I've showed you what the course is that we're presenting for leaders. And you can see now why we need 12 weeks and 24 hours to do the course. We need people to get out and do some of this stuff and come back and talk about it with us. But the educational piece, I took a little longer to explain to you than I would. That would normally be about 20 minutes to a half hour. And then we would have 45 minutes or an hour and a half to talk about these issues, but we'll take whatever time it takes for people to get their discussion and their dialogue in, and to talk about culture, to talk about things like that. I don't know if you've ever been in an environment where your culture's been restricted. You can't do this. You can't. Cults do that. They restrict a lot of communication. They isolate people and they restrict a lot of interpersonal communication with other people because they don't want those core values being challenged in any way, particularly by people who are in those survival modes, for example. That's an example where interpersonal communication and discussion might break somebody out of a cult environment. That's why I tell people don't be mad at everybody who is either right or left in these political arena nowadays. Just forget about that. They're the same people that were in your family or that you were friends with before. Go talk about things. Just talk about things. You don't have to talk about politics. Just get back into knowing each other again, because that's the most important thing. That's the most important thing. Making the connection that allows you to build the trust and the relationship that can allow you to present a different point of view and say, just think about it. You don't have to do anything, but just think about it. And if you have questions, I can clarify it for you. But do not judge them. Do not judge him. Do not go in and say, you're a jerk. You're an idiot. It's one of the things that's bothering me most about the news media now and the criticism they have and the judging. It's all about judging. It's all about blaming and judging. I don't care. I just want to talk. We have different people have different points of views, but some of those points of views may have some viable and valid points that would make sense if you changed them. Uh, but to make sure you're not too locked in to those core values that you just can't seem to shake. Um, and maybe you don't want to shake and you shouldn't shake, but at least have the conversation, because if you don't have the conversation, you won't know for sure. So if you how do we find this course? It's right now. You can find the application to apply for the course here on my website. If you go to www.victorvogel.com, you're gonna find this website. This will pop up right away. You'll get a view of the website with the video there, and then the courses are on the left, and the application is on the right there. This QR code is a code that will take you to my bookshelf where all my books are for sale. You'll find all the textbooks I recommend for this course uh, in this area. Right now, I have a special going, and I'm not doing a special to try to push books during Christmas. My primary issue was I think people are really frustrated and down and out and having trouble communicating because of this election. And I wanted people to have some resources they could go to and look up some information about how to have difficult conversations with difficult people sometimes, or generally how to reconnect interpersonally with other people. So I put all four books that I have on sale for $9, I believe it is. I think it's regularly just under $80 for all four books if you bought them individually. So it's a pretty good deal, but it's not a deal just to sell books. It's more in line with I really want to help people to start connecting with each other again, kind of like I said in the video. Now, if you complete this application form on the right and hit submit, I'll get the application. But before there's no money charge on this application. It just tells me you want to enroll. And then I will get in contact with you and we'll have a video conference. And I want to go over everything to make sure you feel very good about the course, that you see it as a value, you are really interested. And I want to know that you have the dedication to be there during the course for all 12 sessions that we have in the course. We only have 6 people attending, so it is max opportunity to get the most out of it when all 6 people attend all 12 classes that we have in that course. So just want to make sure this is really what you want to do. Then we'll process the account and you'll be all set, and you'll be set to go on the first day. I'll email you a link that has all the copies of the books. So if you're going to enroll in the course, don't worry about the QR code in the books. However, if you're not going to enroll and you just really want some good information about communication, I think will help you get through this holiday season after a rough election season. Those books are really good books to have. They're also going to be good references books. They're ebooks, so you can carry them around on your phone and look them up anytime you want in the future. So that's how you can get the program. If you have any other questions, please you can go to the YouTube community on this YouTube account, and you can write a comment in there, and it'll pop up somewhere where I see it. You can put your comments in here. If this is something you think you're gonna like or want to attend, then you're gonna want to give me what you think are some things that you would like to discuss, and we can discuss them while we're on the air, or we can discuss them in the chat, however you want to approach them. But we need to get a dialogue going about this stuff, because just watching it isn't going to help you get better at it. It's not going to help you get better at it just watching. That's why I don't run this course in 4 hours or 2 hours or whatever it's going to be. I run the course over the course of 12 weeks. And you got a lot of work to do during that 12 weeks besides that one night a week course. It's not just one night a week. You get information, you go become great. You're going to have to go play with it, and you're going to have to show people you're playing with it. Now, I only take 6 people at a time. So when 6 people enroll in this course, I'll close it out. It's now open for starting the winter course, which is January through April, right? Or January, February, March, January through March, and then I'll do another course April through June, and then not another one after that until the following September. So I'm just now putting this course out. I'm not expecting anybody. I'm not paying a lot of money to market it. I'm not investing a lot of money in it. These are things that we can do on this format, just like this. But there are things that you can actively get engaged in. And I'm going to be available to talk with you, to all 6 of those people, quite a bit during that period of time. So if you bump into something in your work and you want to talk about it, you can schedule an appointment. We'll talk about it. And we'll get on the air just like this and talk about it. Only it'll be individual, it won't be recorded. So, all right. Let's see. That's how you get to me. If you're interested in asking more questions, or you want to provide me some things I think we ought to be talking about on these, or you want to look into the program. I'll be glad. In fact, nobody's getting into the program whether they apply or they just query me first. I'm going to be talking to you about the program because at that price, I want to make sure you really feel like you're going to get your money's worth out of it. And I want you to be there every single class. And I want you to do the work in between. That's important. I don't want anybody in there thinking that they can come in, do one class, not do another class. They can't. These classes all build upon each other. They all require the dynamics of discussion between each other and me in order to be able to get a whole lot out of that kind of thing. Uh, this was being broadcast here. So if we went on. It looks like it says I'm live down there right now. So that's it. So this is being broadcast until I create. You can click on live. That's where you find. Best way to do this: just subscribe and hit the notification bell. I guess that's what they say on this thing. It's a notification bell. You hit the notification bell, then and then these will pop up, and you'll be notified periodically as we go along. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I keep bothering you, but I want these casual. I don't want them to be uh, Mr. Podcast Haven, and I don't want to be Joe Rogan. I don't want to be all of those guys. God, I don't want to be Joe Rogan. Uh, but I know they make a lot of money, but I'm not in it for the money. I'm in it to help people communicate, become more effective, and kind of start bringing people back together. I really hate walking around with eggshells trying to figure out if I'm going to hurt somebody's feelings. Uh, and that's because we're not talking interpersonally with each other. So stop it. Get out there and do it. I'll see you in the next podcast.